okay, shit, I'll show up. Needles and hot water fixes most things. People are just going to kill themselves. Community. What on earth are you doing here? Living in a Yunanese jungle for 2 months, fascinated by it. We sweat and we connect.
Cory, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate your time, knowing that you are busy and very active in the community.
Yeah, all good. Happy to be here, man.
And finally, we met in person. That's actually quite interesting that we didn't meet before, because you're very active in the community. You're connected to lots of people. I'm more or less also active in the community, and I've been here for over a decade, but somehow we didn't meet. I know that Shanghai is a massive place, right? But I think the international community is still not that big. And unfortunately, it's also shrinking. That's probably the reason we meet. Finally, you shared the article about you on FitFam, which is a great article. I definitely recommend everyone to read that.
Yeah, it's a funny story, at least.
And it's actually, by reading the article, you already get motivated and inspired, and that's why I'm looking for this conversation forward to actually, borrow a little bit of that energy and passion and dedication.
Yeah, sure.
From you as well. In that article as well, was mentioned that you worked in different parts of the world. Asia, I think Middle East, South America, and you're from the US. Have you ever experienced a culture shock? And if yes, what was it?
Well, I think if I had gone directly from where I grew up to here, it would have blown my mind. So I grew up in a very kind of rural mountain town with a bunch of liberal rednecks in Northern California, like 10,000 people. And yeah, had I come straight here, it would have been another planet. But I think I was actually lucky that I took a progression going from mountains to coastline to eventually living in a place like San Francisco in the outer sunset, where it was already a very diverse city and probably the closest thing the US has to something like Shanghai. And then, I think because of those incremental steps, I've just been more fascinated and curious and engaged, and I've never so much been uncomfortable with the exposure to other cultures. And I do feel fortunate that I've had the chance to be like in Qatar and Brazil and different places. So I actually love it. I think growing up in a less diverse place and actually a very simple lifestyle, being here, I think really gives me a lot of energy and makes it feel more exceptional because of where I come from.
Do you miss sometimes those actually times where, you're just in a small place and you know everything, you feel comfortable, and you're not challenged every day?
Yeah, so like when I tell people that I'm from the Lake Tahoe part of Northern California, I show them pictures and they're like, what on earth are you doing here, right? Like there's like no nature here. And I loved my childhood growing up. It was like 18 years of just outdoor peace and a lot of sport. But at the same time, as I got older, I just didn't feel like I could have the impact that I wanted to have. So, I loved being there. I loved my family and friends, and they always ask me, like, what is it about us or where you grew up that's not good enough? Like, what's not here that you're looking for? And I think just having the energy, the diversity, being able to do so many things, but ultimately trying to have a much larger impact on a scale that I think I'm capable of is something that I felt was lacking in where I come from.
That's pretty exciting. I can relate a little bit because I also coming from the hometown. My hometown is like 7,000 people.
Yeah.
Used to be, I think now it's even smaller. What's your China story? Usually ask people who are coming from different countries, when and why did you come to China?
Yeah, so with a lot of those other countries that I had gone to, I was subcontracted by a US sports performance company called Athletes Performance, which then became Exos. So even though I got the chance to live and travel within those countries, I was living with the team, traveling with the team and everything. Life was a little more isolated. And I actually first came to China around 2013. I took a 2-month contract working with a provincial softball and baseball team from Liaoning, and we were in Xishuangbanna. So the first time I'd ever been to China was living in a Yunanese jungle for 2 months. And if there was ever a point where I had a little culture shock, that would have been it. But I was just fascinated by it. Obviously, that introduction to China is a lot different than Shanghai, but I did swing through Shanghai for a couple days on my way out, and I was just mesmerized by it. And even on the plane ride home, I thought, is this somewhere I could ever see myself living, question mark. And I think when there was that opportunity to come back, it was the first time I was doing so of my own accord, not being sent or subcontracted by a US-based company, but actually moving abroad and living there and trying to create my own lifestyle without having to be tied to a team or a training camp. So I think that opportunity was really exciting. I kind of thought, go over for a year or two, check it out, maybe a transition phase. At the very least, it'll be a fun story. And at the same time, there's this nebulous upside of you never know what's going to happen. And here we are 5.5 years later, pandemic and all, and I still love it. And that part to me has been a very organic process of just admitting like how much I really enjoy living here despite all the other stuff going on.
I think a big part of what makes you happy here in Shanghai particularly, right, is definitely the FitFam.
Yeah.
I think that's probably how you get connected to the
Oh,
people.
for sure.
So talking about FitFam, it's kind of famous here in China. I think lots of people know it about, but I guess outside of China probably not many people heard about it. So if you can quickly introduce what FitFam is and how did you get introduced to it and what role does it play in your life and maybe what role does it play in FitFam community?
Yeah, that's tough to make a short answer because I think it is, when I think of why I love it here so much, it is obviously community, and that can be very general. But it's the people here and not just the expat community, because even FitFam within China is predominantly locals. I first got introduced to FitFam when I first moved here trying to network as a physio. The guy who brought me over, he's like, hey, there's this group of amateurs that does some boot camp style workouts at 6 a.m. in the stadiums. And if you want to go out there, you should check it out. And my first reaction was like, F that, like that sounds terrible. But then as I started working with more active people as patients, one of the leaders who leads in Jing'an, she basically forced me to go out to one of her workouts. And when I got there, my first impression was that it was beautiful. It was free space, public space, and just people moving together, and in the sense of community, and really no judgment, but just acknowledging that we need more free space, we need more movement, we need more accessibility to that kind of a consistency, really. So it was two reactions simultaneously, in awe of like, this is exactly what society needs, and then also kind of in shock from a healthcare perspective just to the volume of burpees they were doing every day. And I was like, this is a train wreck, like people are just going to kill themselves. So one of the first things I did is I helped put in a structure and said, hey, let's not crush burpees every day. Let's have a theme on Monday that's sure like burpees, push-ups, squats, and then mix it up and do more, side to side or rotational, one leg, one arm type movements the next day. And then the third day you could do more partner and game or running type stuff. So that variety allows people to keep moving. Even if they go every day, they're not going to overload themselves. And the rest is kind of grown from there. So now it's a all volunteer run, free fitness community. The motto is that we sweat and we connect. So the fitness and the movement part of it is essential, and that's where the consistency comes in. But also the connection, just that, I don't know, shared experience, doesn't matter where you're from. And that's my favorite part of it, is you'll go out there and you'll have people from 30, 40, 50 different countries out there. And it's just about the fundamental human need of movement and connection. And at its most fundamental level, that's it. And then you mentioned earlier too, like part of the fun of being here is getting to do stuff all day long and be outside. Even this morning, I got up at 4:30 in the morning, went to Jing'an Temple, started running at 5:30, and then went all the way from to Shangyang Park all the way to the Bund with 20 or 30 complete strangers for the most part. And I just love that that's somehow part of my routine. And if you told me before moving to China that I'd be getting up voluntarily at 4 in the morning to go run in the city streets, I would have told you I was absolutely insane. So it really has changed my life. And it is a big part of why I love being here.
Oh, that's super exciting. Quick one here, right? So you sent me the message, right? It was for something. I was like, wow. Is it something that you do every day? You wake up every day at 4, or?
So I lead. You saw my message this morning at 4 a.m. Yeah. So I lead these running or run hit combo workouts twice a week, Tuesday, Thursday. And then I like to mix it up. So, I'll go to F45. Sunday I went to Mega Former. I think that's the other part of being here, is just trying to connect with as many people as possible and try different things. I love that variety. But I do also help organize FitFam on a global level. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned, we've had a lot of people leave, but it actually the concept is growing outside of China, because we have so many people who have left and gone to a new country or gone to their home country, and they want to keep it going. It really is just recognizing, like, hey, as a generation, we're moving less than ever before, or less consistency. We go from extremes to not doing anything to trying to do really high intensity exercise. And I think everybody would benefit just from a open group, non-judgmental, come out if you want, if not, that's okay. And just make movement a fundamental human right, really.
One of the challenges definitely for the communities, right? I think you also experience it yourself. I'm a part of some communities, and I organize many events myself. So the struggle is actually to keep it running, right? Because when you have a strong leader who is passionate about it and who is willing to wake up every day at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. and bring people together and encourage them, but once this person, get busy, got married, have kids, don't have time for this anymore, then the community becomes inactive. So in your experience, what would you suggest how to make it more sustainable and keep going regardless change of leaders or people who are running it?
Yeah, I think we're fortunate in that our founding, really leader did just that. She ended up leaving and talking about Vivu, who helped to really make the community what it is today. Mm-hmm. And she did end up leaving and getting married and having a child, but she's still very active within the community, even from afar. I think technology has really helped with that. And the other thing that forced our hand was the pandemic, where we used to kind of struggle for consistency, whether it was super hot or super cold outside. We used to have to rely on indoor venues and partners to keep it going. But once the pandemic hit, we really opened up Zoom as a virtual space. And once we did that, it actually improved our accessibility worldwide. So now it doesn't matter if people go back to Germany or if they're in Southeast Asia or even in the US. We have monthly and even weekly interactions with some of our original members. We can see them, stay connected. And I think in some funny way, the pandemic has allowed us to keep a sense of global connectivity because we had to. It was the only way we could keep going.
And so that is the community part, and that's your social life here in Shanghai. But of course, there is another part where you work, right? You have your daily job, which is Up Clinic.
Yeah. And
you're the co-founder of this business of this company. Up Clinic is also well known in Shanghai. Definitely, lots of people know about this place. So can you tell a little bit more what's Up Clinic and how did you become a co-founder?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to when I came as a team sport professional 10 years ago. And, there's a lot of traditional ideology about symptom management and what you should or shouldn't eat, needles and hot water fixes most things. But there wasn't this scientific process of really measuring, intervening, and then reassessing and being humble enough to say, like, hey, this isn't working or this is. So I knew that 10 years ago. And then fast forward, after about a year of being here, I met a couple like-minded people that were just saying, look, of course we use evidence. We want best practices and we want to be on par with the international standard. But the truth in China is, if we can just tell people that when you have pain or dysfunction, that moving well and moving more often is better than not moving. End of story. Mm-hmm. So even our branding is somewhat borrowing from the US Physical Therapy Board and saying that movement is medicine. And if all you're doing is managing symptoms, or anybody who wants to be active, if they've been told, look, don't work the body, you're only going to make it worse, you shouldn't do sport, you shouldn't run, you shouldn't run at all, the body's just going to degenerate with time, it creates this mindset that, being passive and resting is better. And then it also doesn't help that most people would rather do nothing. Like, they would rather do the thing that takes less effort. But we know from the sport performance world that if you want the best outcomes, doesn't matter if it's work or fitness or whatever, you need to put effort into it. You need to be consistent, and you need to be mindful of how you're doing it. And then also be honest as to whether or not what you're doing is working. So I took my background in pro sport, and I'm trying to bring it on a mass scale. And I think what makes China so engaging and even lucrative to some degree is that you have crazy amount of volume, things change very quickly, and fitness is becoming more of a social focus, right? And you know, I remember when I first came to China, I couldn't find a cup of coffee anywhere, and now Shanghai is the highest coffee per capita city in the world. So I think that potential for change goes back to that nebulous upside I was talking about. Like, if there's going to be a society or a culture I can really help support, I think this is the best place in the world anyone could ask to be right now. And I'm just lucky that I'm with a group of partners that I met after a year of being here who have their own personal stories where they or someone they love got hurt. They were told they needed surgery. They were told to rest, just let the body heal. And they were essentially, well, to put it not so lightly, mutilated or mangled to the point where they lost basic life functions, and had to have additional surgeries and medical work abroad to just restore their basic abilities. And those stories are powerful. So there is a cultural shift happening here, and I think it will change. I think it has to change because the amount of cost going into healthcare here is too high for the society to make it sustainable. But yeah, if I can just be an advocate that instead of shying away from pain, try to understand why it's there, learn how to work with it, and don't just go after managing the symptoms and managing the effects. So at its most basic level, that's the whole purpose of our organization.
I'm just curious to hear a little bit about what are the challenges as the company you are facing at the moment.
Yeah, so I mean, even 5 years ago, when I was looking out the window at people walking on the street, and I could see that they had problems they were dealing with, I think the two biggest issues are accessibility and awareness. We're an international private provider, and so we started supporting more of the expat market, and the price point even makes accessibility tough, especially when the public services are much more freely available. We will work to fix that in the future as we are more able to prove ourselves. But the awareness piece, I thought I was going to have to go out there like I did with FitFam and just say, like, look, these are some fundamentals you can follow and it's going to help. I thought we were going to have to really broadcast our message and tell people who we are, what we do. But much like nutrition and fitness, there's been this organic shift where people are starting to not stick to the traditional ideas so much. And when a doctor tells a 30-year-old person you should never run again or do sport again, they're starting to kind of go like, wait a minute, there must be another way. Let me at least see what else is out there. So the awareness piece, I've been very pleasantly surprised, has actually been shifting on its own without us having to force the issue.
Well, that's a huge help, definitely, right, to grow the business then. And if you talk a little bit more as well about the broader scale and talk about the wellness and fitness and well-being, so like you already mentioned that it's naturally growing in China, and this is definitely a big market. But what's trendy at the moment, right? And let's say, what would be your advice to startups or companies who wants to expand their business? Where are the opportunities at the moment?
I mean, so I when I think of this in healthcare or fitness to some extent, some of the ground rules for a business in China hold true. You have to have public level support, you have to have government support, and you have to have support from the institutions that are already in place. So I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's crazy. If you look at the number of hospitals related to the number of outpatient clinics, everywhere else there might be like 1,000 hospitals and 50,000 clinics, whereas in China it's like 10,000 hospitals and 50 clinics. So anybody who looks at that is going to go, there is huge market potential, especially for healthcare in China, but nothing happens without government support. Like, the reason that ratio is there is that the government's going to be very reluctant to let any private interests handle what they consider to be a public health priority, right? So if you don't have the guanxi and you're not working with the local bureaus and the local government, you're going to hit a wall of resistance that I don't think you can get past. But having said that, like, the pandemic in many ways has been amazing for fitness and nutrition. More people are more concerned about their physical health and vitality than ever before. Maybe if not out of fear, then just curiosity, right? And it's also trendy. I do love that when you look at things like Spartan racing or obstacle course racing or marathons or cycling, triathlon even, more and more people are seeing their friends do it on social media, and now it's becoming this kind of identity thing. Like, I want to be included, or I just want to have cool pictures like these other people I'm seeing on Weixin. Mm-hmm. So I think it's the optics are there, and more people are thinking of sport and fitness as kind of a cool thing to do. Like, it's cool to take better care of yourself. And I actually think the government has massive interest in having people take better care of themselves, because even within medicine, you have your private providers, the biomedical technology, pharmaceuticals, they're all on the profit side of things. But at the end of the day, if the patients, providers, the third-party payers, and the public sector are all on the side of trying to cut costs and have people take better care of themselves, in China, I think that's going to win in the long run, whereas in the US, for instance, I'm not so sure. I think the scale is tipped a little more on the private interest side of things. So yeah, I do think long term, especially within fitness, health, and wellness, just stay the course and do whatever you got to do to work with the community and also the public sector. If you're trying to take care of the people and help people have more productive, happier, healthier lives at the end of the day, I think you'll be fine. Whereas if all you're trying to do is push memberships and sell training packages and whatnot, that you're probably not going to make it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Those are the good tips. Also, we talk a little bit about technology, right, in each interview, and there are lots of tech startups in your space as well, and I think a big part of it is wearables that helps people to monitor their health, be healthier, to see what's good, what's not, lots of sensors. In your opinion, how much actually those startups solving the real problems, and what are some of the projects or companies or startups that you are personally very excited about?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think the same concepts apply. If you're really trying to help people be a little more independent and autonomous and be able to self-regulate their own physical health, then you're going to do well. So, for instance, I've been consulting or involved with a couple different concepts. One of them is a wearable that is digitized, and it monitors posture and even the curvature of your spine. Mm-hmm. So in one application, you could be sitting in your office, and if you start to slump, before you feel pain, you might have some active feedback that says, hey, you're starting to go to the end of your range and you should try to move or adjust your position. And likewise, there's wearables that people can wear when they're exercising and moving, because a lot of people, they would want to move more, but they're kind of terrified that I'm not moving correctly, or I'm more worried about hurting myself than I am about getting the full benefit of movement. So there are wearables that are going to give people more confidence and say, okay, if you're doing something that your back is bending too much or your knee is diving inward, it can give you active feedback before you load that vulnerable position. I think those are innovative ideas that could take hold in the future. I also like some of the more popular ones now, where fitness trackers and, I think the social aspect that goes behind that, if you have a fitness tracker and you're on Strava and Garmin, and, that social aspect is also driving a lot of people. You don't want to become dependent on it to the point where, like, well, I'm only going to run 15 minutes and I'm not putting that on Strava, so what's the point? Like, you don't want to become dependent on that technology. But, I mean, for me, it's motivating, and even having the heart rate monitors that help you also track, like, vertical oscillation when you're running, that kind of stuff really does feed into moving well and moving more efficiently. So I think there's progress there, but there's so many other wearables, and even some industry standard ones, like these stores that sell orthotics and footwear. If it's a private interest, you have to exercise some caution, because there's never going to be an instance where they're not going to try to sell you product. They're a for-profit company. So anytime anyone says you need this, or invariably it doesn't matter what your actual needs are, they're going to try to push certain product lines, I think you have to exercise some caution, and certainly footwear is an easy one to pick on, because there is literally no one-size-fits-all solution for everybody. It has to be adaptable, and it has to be able to progress as a person improves and kind of, you know, builds more endurance.
There is definitely a huge amount of data, even in the Apple Watch, right? Because it's collecting data every day for a long time. Do you think it's going to be at some point used by hospitals? When you go to the hospital to see the doctor, they just plug it in and check, and okay, you didn't sleep enough, or you know, your heart rate is here, something wrong, right?
You know, and I love that. So as a shameless plug, I would recommend that everybody read *Sapiens* and *Homo Deus* by Noah Yuval Harari, and because he talks about this a little bit, it's, you know, fearing the automation of the workforce. Is technology going to replace physicians someday? Well, maybe. That profession's going to have to adapt. Because if you're a consumer where you have the choice of seeing the 70-year-old expert physician, or you have a database that has all your vitals, all your metrics, and everybody else's, and you can take a blood sample, a DNA sample, and kind of do some basic system, you know, symptom checking, and then you can run it against a database that says, this is the probability of the problem you have, this is the probability of the interventions that we could give you or you could choose, this is their likelihood of success. So I think having providers that are empowered by that information that can help people understand it and work with it eventually will replace the senior practitioners that say, well, you know, this is what I think is going on, here's some medication, let me know how it goes in a couple weeks. So yeah, there's a lot of power in that data, and I think it's for sure coming in the future.
It's probably first going to be definitely a combination, right, of human being plus data, and then already at some point completely replaced.
I would feel more comfortable if you know, if an algorithm had all my data and everybody else's in a similar demographic, and it said, hey, here are the probabilities, just to have more information to work with. For sure, I would prefer that as a consumer.
And the final one, I would love also to hear a little bit encouragement from you, how to motivate people to wake up early in the morning, exercise, you know, sleep well, eat well, and have good habits, how to build it up.
External accountability. Don't go alone. For me, it was as simple. Through FitFam, we had the old WeChat groups where I'd be wavering and be like, I don't really know if I want to show up, and then somebody else in the group would be like, you're effing going, and I'm like, okay, shit, I'll show up. So, you know, having that accountability, that shared experience where you don't just have to rely on how you feel, but you committed and you said, well, I said I was going to be there, or you volunteer as a leader, and all of a sudden, you know, you're not just doing it for yourself, you're accountable to these other people that you're helping support. So that's the reason why I lead a couple weeks or a couple times a week, because it gives me that consistency and accountability. If I was just left to my own devices, there's no way I would be getting up 4 or 5 in the morning to go run in the streets. Like, that's never going to be a thing. So I think finding a community with similar values, putting yourself out there, there's a lot of crossover with the different communities in Shanghai, even with, you know, people coming and going, but you know, at the end of the day, that's my favorite part of being here, is just that shared experience. And we're all, if anything, we're all trying to improve. And that's one of the few things we can control when everything else seemingly is beyond our control at the moment. So yeah, don't go it alone.
That's a good one. Let's wrap it up on this positive note. Thank you so much for all the sharings. I'm going to put some takeaways in the articles as well to make sure that people have this very important information. I wish you all the best at work, and I hope to see you sometime at 5 a.m. Running together.
Hey, you're always welcome. It's free. All you have to do is sign up, and for sure, for anybody watching that wants to know more, I'd be happy to share more information about all the above, and thanks for having me today.
Thank you.